On September 1, 1985, oceanographers searching the vast North Atlantic finally located the remains of the RMS Titanic. They found it sitting on the ocean floor exactly 13 miles away from its last reported coordinates. That massive spatial error is the primary reason the wreck sat undiscovered for 73 years. Search parties had spent decades looking in the wrong place because they were following a flawed historical record. By finding the physical ship, oceanographers recovered the exact geospatial data needed to conduct a retroactive forensic audit of the 1912 inquiry. In the days immediately following the sinking, the British government established a legal narrative dictating exactly what happened and who was responsible. The physical location of the wreck proves that the official 1912 legal narrative was a physical impossibility. Immediately after the disaster, the UK convened a formal court of inquiry, chaired by a retired commercial judge named Lord Mersey, to determine the official cause of the sinking. The inquiry was defined by a conflict of interest. The Board of Trade, the government agency that had certified the Titanic as safe to sail, was granted control over the parameters of the investigation. The board dictated the scope of the inquiry by writing 26 specific questions for Lord Mersey to answer. They were effectively acting as the judge of their own failure. By controlling the questions, the board ensured the investigation would bypass any scrutiny of systemic institutional failures. Instead, the mandate focused strictly on the individual actions of the crew. Both the Board of Trade and the White Star Line relied on this narrow scope. Any wider investigation threatened to hold the corporate operators and the state regulators legally liable for the 1,490 deaths. From the moment it was convened, the inquiry was procedurally engineered to protect the regulatory state and its corporate partners. The Board of Trade was hiding a catastrophic oversight. Their lifeboat volume regulations had not been updated since 1894, even though ocean liners had quadrupled in size since then. Despite this glaring shortfall, the board surveyors officially inspected the Titanic at Southampton and passed it as fit to sail. This diagram illustrates the feedback loop the board constructed. They heavily weighted the inquiry's mandate toward two specific points. Question 2, asking if the ship complied with the existing acts, and Question 26, asking for suggestions for new rules. This structure created a closed legal loop. The Board of Trade wrote the rules, they certified the ship according to those rules, and now they wrote the questions determining if their own rules were followed. The political stakes were extreme. The president of the Board of Trade, Sidney Buxton, faced motions of censure from the opposition, attempting to dock his salary over the disaster. If Lord Mersey's inquiry concluded that the existing regulations were criminally negligent, the board itself would be legally culpable. They had an existential need to manufacture a scapegoat. This chart visualizes the raw math of the disaster. The Titanic sailed with a total lifeboat capacity of 1,178, yet there were 2,201 passengers and crew on board. When that mathematical deficit was applied during the sinking, survival became a matter of class. 97% of first-class women survived, compared to just 46% of third-class women. In the subsequent parliamentary debates, the shipping industry fiercely defended this deficit. One shipowner and member of parliament called providing boats for all one of the most ridiculous proposals ever put forward, citing the high cost of the extra crew needed to operate them. The industry relied on the theory that a modern ship's bulkheads acted as its own lifeboat. This created a fatal complacency across the entire shipping sector. Acknowledging this arithmetic meant indicting the entire Anglo-American shipping cartel. It meant declaring the standard operating procedure of the global maritime industry to be legally negligent. To avoid placing blame on this systemic lack of lifeboats, the inquiry required an external, individual reason for the massive death toll. They found their target in the SS Californian, a British cargo steamer that had stopped in the ice field near the Titanic that night. The UK formal inquiry was a grueling process, spanning 37 sittings. The court sought a definitive culprit, reaching a turning point on the 24th day. On day 24, Attorney General Sir Rufus Isaacs executed a precise procedural manipulation. He retroactively inserted a new mandate, Question 24B, specifically asking why the Californian failed to assist the Titanic. This was a gross procedural irregularity. The new question was added after the captain of the Californian had already testified and been dismissed. He was entirely stripped of his ability to defend himself against the new allegations. Sir Rufus Isaacs was simultaneously holding a massive block of shares in the American Marconi Company. Blaming a ship that allegedly ignored wireless distress signals served to boost the perceived value of the technology his shares relied on. The inquiry weaponized legal procedure to isolate a single, defenseless scapegoat, successfully deflecting the public narrative away from the Board of Trade. This 1912 nautical map plots the Mersey inquiry's official spatial conclusion. In its final report, the court legally ruled that the Californian was stationary between 8 and 10 miles away and could have reached the Titanic to save many, if not all, of the lives lost. To achieve this neat spatial narrative, the court suppressed evidence. They ignored sworn affidavits placing a different ship, the Mount Temple, much closer to the disaster site. That testimony contradicted their timeline, so it was excluded from the official record. In 1985, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution team initially failed to find the Titanic because they were following these official 1912 coordinates. They succeeded only by abandoning the legal record and changing their search methodology. Instead of scanning for a massive, intact hull, they deployed the Argo camera system to track the trail of light debris scattered by deep ocean currents. This search grid shows the result. When they finally mapped the wreck, the physical evidence proved the Titanic sank 13 miles away from the position recorded in the Mersey report. When you apply the 1985 physical coordinates to the 1912 timeline, the math breaks the inquiry's conclusion. Even if the Californian had steamed immediately toward the distress rockets, it was physically too far away to reach the Titanic before it sank. The inquiry's definitive legal ruling was scientifically impossible. It was a spatial fiction engineered to close the case. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, the Board of Trade maintained its monopoly of wisdom. By focusing public blame onto the Californian, the regulators evaded institutional accountability. Despite the catastrophic loss of life and the mathematically proven negligence regarding lifeboat capacity, no corporate body and no individual regulator ever faced criminal prosecution. In the subsequent parliamentary debates, corporate representatives hijacked the floor. They consumed the debating time by arguing that tighter safety regulations would hurt British trade. While boats for all eventually became standard practice, it was a reactive measure that failed to address the root regulatory rot. The regulators were never held accountable for the unsafe conditions they had certified. The immediate legacy of the disaster was a masterclass in institutional self-preservation. The inquiry functioned exactly as it was designed to. In 1985, the physical discovery of the wreck functioned as a retroactive forensic audit of a corrupted legal system. The official Mersey report is a typed document just 4 lines long, citing only excessive speed and an iceberg. The geospatial data recovered decades later exposes the layers of institutional evasion that those 4 lines were meant to bury. Without the physical intervention of the oceanographers, the legal fiction of the scapegoat would have remained unquestioned history. The Board of Trade's self-investigation would have stood as the permanent truth. When a regulatory body is allowed to investigate itself, the resulting output is rarely a map of the truth. It is almost always a map of convenience.